Hello! Welcome to Plugging Along, a stream dedicated to LOTRO plugins. Last time on Plugging Along, we continued making improvements to the Opaque Quest Tracker plugin by adding load and unload messages, localizing the plugin, and fixing the saving and loading code to handle decimal numbers correctly across different client languages and processor configuration combinations. Finally, we published the plugin to LOTROinterface.com, asked for it to be included in the LOTRO plugin compendium, and announced it on the LOTRO forums. Today, we're going to cover making updates to an already published plugin as we tackle some of the nice-to-have items on our want list, on our to-do list. I have a rough outline of topics to cover today, but please feel free to jump in and chat with your thoughts and questions. I'm going to check chat right now, make sure no one's shouting at me that I'm muted or anything like that, as I take a sip of water. And also rearrange my windows. Okay, so where were we? Well, if we go into the plugin manager in LOTRO, all right, I was just noticing in my screen you can just make out the dead spire in the distance if you have optics set far enough away from Bree. So Bree is in the shadow of the Barrow Downs all the time, and I think it explains their grumpiness. Okay, so the Opaque Quest Tracker is this darkened region behind the quest text because a friend of mine was having trouble reading the text here. And last time we finished up the basic features that allowed us to move it around, to resize it, to change the opacity, how much you can see through it, and also to just lock it in place once you're happy with it, so that you can click and drag behind it, or just click behind it. So that's the Opaque Quest Tracker. So is it done? Well, we could call that done, but there are a couple of nice to have items in there that we just didn't have time to do in order to be able to ship version 1 ever. And that's a thing that you'll notice if you get into plugin development or software development in general, but plugins is there's so many things you can do, and people will say, oh, what about this? Oh, what about this? And all of them will sound like really neat ideas. Well, many of them. Oh, that's a cool idea. Let me add it to the list. That's a cool idea. Let me add it to the list. And if you never ship, if you just keep looking at that list, the list grows faster than you can make it happen. So it's a good idea to try to push past and ship something even though it doesn't have all of the features you want. And that's what we did last time. We had a window, we could move it around, it had per character settings, but there were some nice to haves that didn't make it in, but we still got it out to the world so people could use it. And that was the important thing. So let me go ahead and bring up my text editor onto the screen. There we go. Okay, so this is the Opaque Quest Tracker Lua file that we've been working with. We also have a couple other files in this directory. We have a to-do file and a readme file. Now, the to-do file hasn't really been updated since last time because one of our things that we had on the list to do was to ship it. Well, that's done. So what we can do is we can start modifying our to-do file to say, what are we going to do for the next version? Version 1 is out the door, 1.00 is out the door. What about version 1.0.1? Well, one of the things that I really wanted to get into this as soon as possible is right now there are per character settings on where the opaque box is. But for a lot of people, we use UI configuration files so that all of the UI shows up in the same place for all of our characters, so we don't have subtle differences. So some people might want, this character has quest log over on the left side, the other character has a quest tracker on the right side, but most people like a pretty consistent interface, it seems like. So having to make someone customize the Opaque Quest Tracker for each of their characters just doesn't feel like it fits in line with how I use it, at least, and how I think a lot of people probably use it. So what I want to do is have a button somewhere where you push it, and however the Opaque Quest Tracker is now, any character you log into, that's the starting point for them. They can always move around, change it from there, do whatever, but it'll at least match that template character's position, size, opacity. Cool. And something else that someone suggested in a previous stream that I thought was a really neat idea was a color picker so you could choose the background color. And the reason why I really like this is in the in-game, let me go ahead and hide this a sec. In the in-game options for the chat window, which is kind of what this opacity is based on, the chat window, you can change opacity, just like we're doing here, but you can also change the color of text that comes in. And this is very handy to just, especially for user channels, where you can spot text coming in and saying, oh, that's of specific interest to me. And so these have a color picker associated with them where you can change the color of that text. You don't change the color of the opacity, but it's a pretty close metaphor for what I'm interested in doing. Because I think it'd be really cool if that could be maybe a transparent green or a transparent red. Oh, thanks, Moobot. There's a beacon. I think I'm in it. Okay, so that's what I'm looking at. When I pull that back up, that's what I'd like to look at today, is saving that set up as a default and adding in some sort of a color picker by some means so that we can change the color so it's not just an opaque black, it's an opaque whatever you want. And then obviously the list of things to do is much longer than the list of things that we're going to do. That's normal, but this list is very useful. I recommend you keep it for whatever project you're working on. Just, oh, that's a neat idea, because otherwise we might forget that neat idea. And every once in a while you just review it and say, oh, do we really need a button to reset the size and position? Maybe not. So eventually you might cull those and remove some of those ideas. Maybe they become overcome by events. For instance, this box can't go outside the screen anymore. We added a function to make sure it's always on screen. Maybe resetting the size position isn't as relevant anymore. So we'll leave that looking through that for later, and for now we'll just focus on this. Cool. And our README, we want to go ahead and make a change. We're going to start working on version 1.0.1. So we'll add a section to the README. This is how we're going to track what changes we've made, and that makes release notes telling people what's different between versions way easier because you can more or less copy paste this section of the file. It's also useful for you as a developer because 6 months from now, a year from now, when you're trying to figure out, okay, they've got version 1.2.3 and they've got version 1.2.4, what's different? Well, just go to the README file and see, oh, this is what changed. Cool. Very helpful if you're trying to help someone through a problem and they're on an old version. It's just very useful all around. Okay, so we've set up some files here. As always, I'm going to go ahead and have a little source control running in the background. You don't have to use this, but I do recommend if you're going to do anything more complicated, you do invest in learning a little bit about source control. In this case, we're just going to go ahead and come in here and make a snapshot of where we're starting today. Reorganized to-do and README for Opaque Quest Tracker 1.0.1. Neat. Got a little snapshot there. So now, as we're making progress, we'll be able to say, whoops, didn't mean to do that, and undo it very easily. Okay, go ahead and hide that again. So, saving the current setup as a default for other characters. How do we do that? Well, how are we currently saving the details? I'm going to come in here and I'm going to collapse down some of the things in this file so we can get sort of a higher view. In fact, let's see, selection, is there a collapse all? I bet there's a collapse all. I bet I shouldn't try to find it live on camera though. Okay. I think there is though. So we have in this function a save settings that currently is looking at two variables, setting data scope and settings file name. What's that all about? Well, the data scope is an indication of what granularity character or plugin data is being saved. And actually, I think now's a good time for me to bring up the API documentation. There we go. So, in the plugin documentation, the functions that we're talking about here are by default the turbine.plugin.load and unload functions. Now, as you may remember, if you were with us last time, we went ahead and substituted in a variation on those, the patch data load and patch data save functions that Vendor put together, which help with localization issues. That way, when you save decimal numbers, for instance, to a file, they're able to be loaded back in correctly. So, under the covers, this patch data load is turbine.plugins.load with some extra stuff to help with localization issues, switching between English and French and German clients. And same thing with the patch data save. Turbine, plugin, turbine, plugin data, load, turbine, plugin data, save. Okay, so we can see the first thing that the save and load functions take, the first parameter, is a scope. Well, what is the scope? The scope is this character specific? Is this server specific? Or is this account specific? There's nothing bigger than that. You can't save something for a plugin that applies to all accounts on your machine. So if you share your machine with someone else, or if you have a free-to-play account that you use to help with backup when you're banned, that kind of thing, a plugin can only see data that is saved under your account, or under this server for your account, or for this character on this server on this account. So those are the three scopes we have access to. So if we want to save the current setup as a default for any character that doesn't have its own save file, then we can take advantage of this and say, we'll have one save file for a character, and we'll go ahead and make one save file for an account. And when we go to load the character file, if it's not there, we can check and see if the account one is there. And the account one we can treat as if it is the default to use, this overriding default. And if the account one isn't there, then we can just fall back on the basic values that we have in the hard-coded data structure here in these default settings. So we can always fall back on this, but we can have an intermediary step where we say, okay, the user has said use these instead of what's in code. So we have an idea. What is that going to look like? Well, to get us on our way, it might be useful to go ahead and see these three scopes in action. So let's go into our main function and add a couple of test pieces of code. So we know that turbine.plugindata.save is a function. We know that the first thing it takes is a data scope. So we can do turbine.datascope. Let's start with account. That's sort of the broadest category. And then it needs a key. That's the file name that it's going to save to. So this, in fact, is a fine thing to save it to. .test. and then finally the data that's going to be saved out. So let's see. Local account data test data equals, and then we can go ahead and just create a couple things. Account, this is a test. Cool. So we have some data to write out. And while we're at it, we could go ahead and do something very similar for the other two scopes and get something for each of them. So the next down from account is server, and the final one is character. And then for each of these, we can go ahead and create distinct data. So server test data and character test data. Cool. Server, character, and let's make those a little distinct. This is an account test, this is a server test, and this is a character test. Great. Plug those in. And now when the plugin is finishing loading, it should write out 3 files here. Chromite in chat says, I just started watching. Are you updating the plugin for account/server/character preferences separation? Basically, yes. What I had in mind is some sort of button in the options that says, save my current setting as the default for any other characters that don't have their own preferences. The idea being, the first time you load this up, you move it, you position it, change the opacity, lock it into place, and then you hit the save button, and then that's the starting point for any of your other characters. And for those of us who use the /UI space layout space save and load feature to have a consistent layout between characters, that means that this, once it's in position, will be in the right place for all of your characters. So that's what we're trying to do here. But hey, welcome back. Okay, so we were going on a little tangent. I was demonstrating how the different scopes for plugin data saving work, where those files end up on your system. So just finished writing some code. We're gonna see if it works, first of all, and if there are no errors in-game, what that looks like in the file structure itself. So first of all, we can see I had an error. So we're gonna go in and fix that error. Let's see. Line number 320. Great. The key contains invalid characters. Interesting. So it is not legal to use a period in the file name that you're requesting to be saved in. Good to know. Didn't even occur to me. Let's give that a try then. Great. So the plugin has loaded, and that should mean because we were in the loading state, not the running or the unloading state, but the loading state, any file saving or loading that we do is immediate. So those files should already be on the system. Hello, Shoreless Skies, welcome. Oh, something's gone funny with my window here. There we go. Okay, so I'm gonna switch to sharing my desktop so we can go ahead and, there we go, take a look at the file structure. So, documents, Lord of the Rings Online, plugin data. You should see an account in here for, a folder in here for each of your accounts. And then within here, you will see a list of servers, but also a folder called All Servers. So if you've done something at the at the account scope, then it's going to be in the All Servers folder. Oh, cool. Got some other stuff here. Reminders, save stuff's there. So, all right, Laura, you've got me curious. What's in your server IDs? Fascinating. Okay, so we can see in the All Servers bucket, so the account level bucket, there's a Turbine, Datascope, account, test, plugin data. And we can see that we had the same stuff that we were looking at in code. Account, this is an account test. We can also see that in the process of writing out numbers, those integers, or what looked like integers, have resolved as floating point numbers with 0 after the radix point, which is great. So if you see this in a file, it's not inherently wrong. I believe it will load just fine, but it's a little weird to see that if you were not expecting it. So that's where the account level data is stored. Under your account folder in all servers. The next one, at the server level scope, inside your server, you will see, first of all, a folder for each character, and then a folder for all characters. So if something is saved at the server level, then it's going to come here into all characters. So we can see here, Turbine Data Scope server test. And in here we have server. This is a server test. Awesome. And finally, if something is at the character level, it ends up in a specific character named folder, like this one is in the titleless folder. And inside here, we can see character. This is a character test. Awesome. So you can have something very specific to just this character. And if you're logged on to a different character, the plugin cannot see the file at all. Or just this server. So if you're logged into a different server, the plugin can't see it at all. Or account-wide. As long as you're logged into a character on your account, regardless of the server, the plugin can see it. So this is really useful for plugins that do want to track things across servers, like the Reminders plugin, where you might want to say, oh, I have an ingredient crate to go pick up on Treebeard. I'm on Evernight. I should switch on over. So cross server plugin data can be really useful for that kind of thing. So on the assumption that all of my characters are probably going to be using the same UI file. And what did in case you're not familiar with that, there is a command you can do called /UI space layout. And if you just press enter there, nothing happens. But /UI space layout space load or save, if you type those in, you can save or load UI layout files. And I'm not sure if you can do this through the UI. That'd be kind of cool if there was a way to do it. They may not have added that in, but let's say, for instance, that I have temporarily moved my quest tracker to the center of the screen because I'm really focused on that. And maybe I'm a chicken, so I want to make that radar really big. Radar, there we go. So radar is really big, and you know what? Let's go ahead and move it to the other side of the screen. Now, I probably don't want to play with that the whole game. I'm just doing that for one specific instance. So I have previously saved my layout, which I first started doing when I was doing a chicken session play, because when you're doing session play, your layout resets to kind of the box default. And so I was saving a layout to use in chicken play. So UI space layout space load space chicken, because that's the name of my file. And we can see it has restored most of what's going on here. The radar position is still a little off, but we can see the quest tracking area went back to where it was. The size of the radar went back to where it was. It's quite likely if I had to run it a second time, yeah, the radar would go back to its spot. It looks like it moved the radar first and then resized it, and when it resizes it, it moves towards top and left. It even moved this chat window. Excellent. So that's a layout file, very handy. If you have a specific layout that you want to use across multiple characters, I highly recommend, when you have it configured just the way you like it, /UI space layout space save space name, a file name. You don't have to give a file name. It'll just save it to a file, and it'll know that's the latest thing you saved. But I have found that sometimes I'll do a load, and I'll get an error message where it says, I don't know what file you're talking about. And maybe that's because I have multiple files. I'm not sure. But if you give it a name, it's very good about consistently loading. So a name that you can remember, very handy, because I'm not sure there's a list command. There is not. But if you do it wrong, it'll spit out the actual syntax that you're looking for. In this case, UI, layout, save or load, file name. Awesome. Hello, Just Right. Welcome to the stream. Chromite says, I use resolutions as my file name, like 1440p, 1080p. That's a really clever way to do it. If you are adjusting your layout because you keep changing resolution sizes, then as long as you know in your head which ones are which, like, oh, my laptop's 1080, my desktop is 1440, then you've got a really fast way to do that. If you're using a multi-monitor situation like I am, where you're doing windowed, you can go and find these things in the LOTRO. Let's see, Lord of the Rings Online UI, I believe. Layouts. Oh, there we go. Chicken. And one could even crack it open and see what's going on. It's an XML file. It just says, for this thing, it is in this place with this size, right? It's not hard to read as long as you know what the layout ID is of each element on the screen. Otherwise, it's going to be kind of a little rough until you get to the IDs here. Cool. So that's what that is. And if you're ever interested in digging into that, it's just sitting there in your documents folder. Okay. So that was a little diversion. Nope, not that one. No, this one. That was a little diversion into what it is for scopes. What scopes mean for a save file. And this is sorted alphabetically, but from biggest scope to smallest scope, we have account, and then server, and then character. Now, there's no real harm in playing around with this yourself. LOTRO does not enforce any real restrictions, except as we saw, there's special characters that you can't include in the key name. This is the file name that's going to be used. I would bet money that you can't use slashes would probably be out. We've already seen that periods are not allowed, and so it's going to constrain what you can do here. But you get to decide what your file name is. And this is something I referenced way back in the very first episode, episode 0 of Plugin Along, is if you were a not nice plugin developer, you can specify the name of a file that a different plugin uses. For instance, PluginData, if we come in here to the all characters, we can see the daily tasks plugin has saved something called daily tasks _ settings. LOTRO does not enforce that only daily tasks gets to read or write from that. Your plugin can read from that. Your plugin can overwrite it if it chooses to. I recommend not doing that, and this is why you'll see people prefixing either their plugin name or their developer name in the case of Thurlore here. They will prefix it because that way it's very easy for you as the person whose computer this is on to look and say, oh, okay, that's probably a daily tasks file, that's a deed tracker file, that's the one we just wrote actually. And that's probably a reminders plugin. Thurlore developed that one. So putting the name in the file is both useful if you're just looking at it, and also minimizes that chance of a conflict with someone. If your file is just called settings.plugindata, that is just asking for another plugin to also use settings.data and to have a problem when they're both loaded. So, like I said in the very first episode, if someone is writing a bad plugin and it is stomping all over your save, your plugin data files, people are going to say that. No one's going to download the plugin. It's not going to go very far, and it can only do things in your plugin data directory. But be a good citizen in the plugin community and prefix your plugin name or your developer name depending on the purpose of the file. That way it's very obvious what it is and really reduces the chance of someone doing it accidentally. Okay, so that's our little test here. As I was saying, you can play around with it. You can try what does it look like to write just a single string? What does it look like to write a number? What does it look like to write to multiple files? You can write to multiple files in the same scope, and you can do all of these things without LOTRO complaining at you because it doesn't care. You're a plugin, you can write to the plugin data directory. End of story. As we've mentioned in a previous stream, if a plugin goes through 3 parts of a life cycle. It is either loading or running or unloading. And during loading and unloading, your plugin can read and write with no limitations. During the running phase, when you ask the LOTRO to load something or to save something, there's a delay of 10 to 15 seconds before that actually happens. So only during the loading or unloading. So if you try to load or save something while the plugin is running and it doesn't look like anything's happened, just wait. Or you can force a save by manually unloading your plugin, and any queued up saves will get flushed out at that point as well. Even if they were triggered during the running section, now you're in unloading, everything happens. Okay. So that was test code. We're not going to keep that in here, but that was to play around with the idea of scopes and to see where those files end up. So let's undo that. And now that we have a sense of scopes, we can see that the account scope is probably where we want to be. I'm going to go ahead and switch back into the compositing. Keeps windows where they're supposed to be a little bit more. Awesome. And we're going to go ahead and take the account scope and use that to make a single default save file that applies to all of the characters that you control. Okay, just repositioning a window here. Okay, so how are we going to make this happen? Well, the first thing is we have some variables here calling out the scope and the file name that we're using, and we use them in the helper function save settings. Now, it is possible to modify this function, maybe to take, is default or something and make this function more complicated, but we're gonna maybe keep it a little bit easier and just make a second function that we'll just call save default settings. No reason to make this harder than it is. Now, we'll want to use different data scope and a different file name. So let's come on back here and use these as a starting point. So maybe we'll call it default settings data scope and default settings file name. And we've already said, instead of doing it per character, we want to do it for the entire account. So there'll just be one file. And we'll go ahead and say that's the default settings. So if someone's looking at the file, they can distinguish that between just a normal settings file. Hello, Oatmeal5, welcome. Okay, so we have a couple of new variables here. Let's go back down to this helper function, save default settings, and make sure we're using the right ones here. Otherwise, we'll be very sad. So that's going to be default settings data scope and default settings file name. What are we saving? Well, we're using the current settings as the template for all the other characters. So the same thing, we're just saving the current settings. There's nothing to stop the user from moving the window, click the button, move the window, click the button, and keep on tweaking. Each time we'll just write out their current settings, and that will be the default for any new characters that log in that don't already have their own custom file. Okay. So we've got a function to call. Now we need to know when to call it. I'm going to go ahead and hide the API documentation. So we can come in here into the game and under the system menu, plugin manager, We already have an options window here where we're controlling the opacity and whether or not the window is locked. So my vision for this feature involves adding a button that, I don't know, naming things is hard, but basically make it go, and you click the button and the thing happens. So we'll start with that and we'll figure out a name for it as we go. Maybe it'll become a little bit more obvious. So where it does this happen? This happens in the draw options control function. Neat. Let's go ahead and collapse down some of these other things. Let's go ahead and open that up. Now, you do not have to organize your code so that as you go down through the function, you're also going down through the UI, but it can be helpful. So if we're adding a button at the bottom, we might want to add it at the bottom of the function as well. It makes it a little bit easier to come back in and change something later. So what are we going to do? We want to, let's just type that out. Add a button to make the current settings the default settings for other characters that don't already have a save file. Well, that's too long. Now, fortunately, we can just go ahead and split that comment into 2 lines. Okay, so what is this going to look like? Well, we need a button. And it'd be nice if it was a LOTRO themed button. It has this blue background with the yellow text. So let's go ahead and pull up the documentation and find that. There we go. So as we've seen before, the documentation is divided into these different sections, and all of the things that are LOTRO brand specific are under turbine.ui.lotro. And we can find a button here. Awesome, just what we need. A button that provides the look and feel of the Lord of the Rings game in-game, I feel like that should be hyphenated, Lord of the Rings in-game silver button. Great. Why do they say silver? Well, they're talking about the outline here. There's also gold buttons. Oh, man. Where would we find one of those? How do you get your gifts to pop up? All right. I feel like there's... No. Well, that's kind of gold. You know what? Let's just make a gold button and see what the difference is, because I'm forgetting. So, what does it look like to make one of these buttons? Well, we're going to just say local make default button, and that's going to be a new turbine.ui.lotro.button, and we'll switch it back and forth between gold and we'll see the difference that way. Cool. So first thing we'd like to do with UI elements is to parent it. Remember that UI elements don't get drawn unless they are owned in a hierarchy by a top level window. In this case, the options window itself, which owns the options control that we've passed to it with this function here. And so we're going to do that same thing where we set parent options. Make a default button. Great. Set that parent. We want to change its position. We want to do several things, but you know what? We're just going to start with a set text. Oh, what do we think? Use current settings as default. It's a little wordy. We'll fix it later. Okay, so we're going to start with that. We're going to go ahead and hide that documentation. We're going to load this and come back into the options. Okay, cool. Oh, Redhead has mentioned Hobbit presence is here. I was trying to remember if there was a gold button in the Hobbit window. It's behind the Sublime text. I don't see it. Okay, so we have a blue button here that says use. So obviously a fix or two is going to be needed. But in the documentation, we can see that there is a gold button, and I need to try that. So instead of a button, we're going to go ahead and make a gold button and unload and reload. Oh, I swear I've seen that before. Where do we see that button? I don't know. Okay. Well, whoops. I've closed too much. If you can remember where we've seen this gold-themed button in the UI, it's not coming to me, but it looks really familiar. In the meantime, it's not in a good place for us. Let's come back into the code and fix that. So, make default button. We need to set position. Now, something we've done, if you remember from previous times, is everything in this UI is 10 pixels from the left. And that gives a little bit of a margin feel to the UI. So we're going to do the same thing here, and we want it to be below the lock window in place checkbox. We can see the lock window in place, checkbox starts at 70 pixels down and is 25 pixels. So if we want a little extra space, we should go ahead and do that 70 plus a little extra 30. Let's make it at least 100 down. While we're at it, we can also go ahead and make it wider. Thank you. My extra water has come. We can go ahead and just take a guess and say, what about 180 pixels? That's probably too much, but we'll take a look. So come back into the plugin, cycle it, come into the options. Oh, it was not too much. That's fun. Okay, so that's a better picture of what the gold-themed button looks like. Just checking out chat. Thank you, Moobot. Oh man, it's killing me. Where is that gold button used? Anyway, so the gold button may be a little weird here. So we're going to go ahead and just go back to what they call the silver button. I tend to think of it as the blue button because the foreground color of it is blue. And we can see that right there. I feel like it's a little bit too close to the previous thing. So let's go ahead and knock it down a few more pixels. And while we're at it, go ahead and make it even wider while that text is on there. Oh, it has gone straight out of the containing control. Now, its parent is options. So options, we're going to want to go ahead and change that size too. Let's just add another 75 pixels in there. Why not? Give us plenty of room to work with. Okay, so we can see there's not a lot of wiggle room here, but the button is technically big enough. If we went ahead and knocked it up to 250, there would be a little extra space here. And that gives the languages a little wiggle room as well. Sometimes they'll have longer words for the same concepts. Oh, Little Redhead says, what gold button are you looking for? Let me go ahead and pull it back up here. So we can see, in fact, let me just duplicate this section, call it gold button, and go ahead and set the position down to 150. Okay, so what you can see right now, and go ahead and knock your resolution up a little bit if you want to be able to see it. What you can see right now in the options are two LOTRO skinned buttons. One of them is called the silver, or the default button, but it's described as a silver button, and one of them is called the gold button. And they both are LOTRO themed buttons, and so if you use them, anyone who's reskinning who's using a different skin, those skin changes should apply automatically to your plugin as well, regardless of whether you use the default button or the gold button. And that should be true about anything in the LOTRO section of the documentation that we see here. Anything in here should respond to skin changes. So buttons, checkboxes, gold buttons, gold window. Okay, now I'm curious about the gold window now. Hang on. I'm going to go off topic a little bit. Create main window. All right, so UI.lotro.gold window. What is a gold window? Fascinating. All right, let me unlock that thing. So, can I write that? Cool. Okay, this is a gold window. And what our head says, how about the craft windows? Do those count as gold buttons? I would have to. Let me go ahead. Oh no, I don't have my VIP stuff. That's an excellent question. Let's see. Those look like they are the normal ones. That's got a fancy border, but it doesn't quite look like the gold. I don't know. This could be, but it's got the blue background. Well, now I'm all sorts of interested. Anyway, so this is a gold window. You can see how it has the same filigree around the corners. It's got the same general look and feel as the standard window, but the little leaf stuff here around the title is different. And the colors, including the color of the close button, is different. That is fascinating. All right. Not what I meant to be doing, but fascinating. All right, let's go ahead and get the code back up here. We're going to go ahead and undo that change because ultimately that is a better look. Yeah, windows nearby, but I like my perch on high. I can keep an eye on things. Okay. So, not to get too distracted, but yes, gold button, gold window, the item control. Neat. Any of these things, the quick slots, the scroll bar, or the LOTRO scroll bar, not just the basic scroll bar, the text box, and the window, these are all things that should respond to skinning. And so if you're using those instead of making your own button or your own widget that they don't provide, that can be really nice for those people who are using skins. Your plugin will look like it's part of that system. Okay. And I go ahead and squeeze that back up. Now, there was a little bit of whirlwind of changes there. And one of the things I like to do when I've made a bunch of changes that I might not want to keep is come back in and look and see what did change. So if I make this a little bit wider, okay, and that can just be a lot narrower. Cool. So we do have those default setting variables and that function. We made the options area bigger here. And we've added a button. Oh, it's just the double button that we have to clean up. Cool, thanks, Fork. Okay, so back in this area, we made the gold button. We don't need that. Perfect. All right, we'll go ahead and refresh. We'll come back into the options. We have a button. Clicking it does nothing because we haven't made it do anything yet. Oh, thank you, Little Redhead. Little Redhead has pointed you towards skinning. I haven't gotten into skinning much, but to be compatible with her setup, I do think I've got them. So let's see. In the UI, there is a section for skin. Or you can just scroll on down. It's about here under miscellaneous. So the current user skin, none is equivalent to the default generic LOTRO skin. But as you can see, there's a bunch of other options. And I'm going to avoid doing that because I don't want to make my computer cry trying to handle a skin rechange while it's streaming. But if you're interested in maybe changing the look and feel, there's some really cool skins that go ahead and say, hey, if you're not using these buttons down here, we're just going to hide them so you can see the cool landscape behind them. And they'll do that on both sides. So those are like the, I think they're the short versions here. So Opaque Short, I think, is talking about the length of the bar down there. And it's a really cool idea. I tend to not do that just because I haven't gotten into it yet. Plugins have been my particular rabbit hole to go down. Okay, let's come back in to Sublime Text. Cool. So we have a button, but we're not responding to it when it is clicking. So let's come back into the documentation and see how do we do that. Well, we have a button, and we are looking for an event. There are several events in here, but the first one here in the list is click. And that's going to be fired when the user clicks on the button. Great, that's exactly what we want. So just like any other event handler, it's going to be a function that takes a sender and some arguments. Cool, make default button. We're gonna declare that the click equals a function with a sender and some arguments. What do we do when that button clicks? Well, we can always double check that we have done things correctly by writing something out to the chat log. So shell.writeLine, you clicked the button. Cool. So I'm gonna go ahead and hide that documentation here. We'll unload and reload. And when I click this, we can see in the standard output, you click the button. Perfect. That's exactly what I wanted to see. So now we can do something real in here. Well, what are we going to do in here? We already know that we have a function, save default settings. I'm not sure I like the name of that. We want to save the settings as default. Let's try that. So we have a function that does exactly what we wanted to do. It takes our current settings and saves them out at the at the account level. Now, we're not doing anything with it yet, but this is how we're going to generate that file. So instead of you click the button, we're just going to go ahead and save settings as default. Done. Each time we click the button, we'll save settings as default. Again, we're in the running state as a plugin, so that file's not going to show up for maybe 15 seconds, but it is queued up. So even if the person clicks the button and then immediately logs out or unloads the plugin, that will eventually hit your disk, short of a power failure. Chromite says, you've won the game, you clicked the button. Oh my goodness. I one of these days, in my copious spare time, I do want to make a little, it's called a 9 puzzle, I think. There's probably a bunch of names for it, but it's the one where you have a grid of numbers and one of them is missing and then it gets scrambled up. And so you push the thing and it moves into the empty space and you have to unscramble the puzzle. You could do that as a LOTRO plugin so easily, just as something to do while you're waiting for the a respawn or the silver node to come back or your raid group to get back together. Anyway, maybe that'll be a future stream. Anyway, so we click the button, we save the file. Let's see that in action. So unload, reload, let's come back in. So let me switch back over to the desktop view so that we can come in. And right now we have the all servers folder here. I'm going to go ahead and have this here, and I'll bring it back up here. So we clicked the button, and there's no file here yet. But if we've done everything correctly, after 10 or 15 seconds, a file should show up. Or if we were to unload the plugin. Let's start by just being patient for a second. Excellent. We can see Opaque Quest Tracker default settings was written out about 15 seconds after the plugin said, please write this out. Great. Let's take a look at that. It looks like a settings file. Perfect. That's all we wanted. This is the settings for the opaque one. And when we try to load it, it'll behave just like any other settings file. It's going to make it very easy to work it into our process. So let's see it again. If I say click that button, it's not here, and then unload, we can see it gets written out immediately as part of the unloading of the plugin. LOTRO says this plugin had a write queued up. We'll flush it out as part of this process. Neat. Chromite says, do you take plugin fixing requests? That'd be a fun stream. I have a couple of fix-its that I want to do for existing plugins. Not because they're bad, just because some of them are so large, like Titan Bar, that there's little bits here and there that I would like to patch up or submit a fix for. So I do have a list of those, but so far I've just wanted to do some of this from the ground up. What is it like to develop and publish a plugin? So we haven't quite gotten there yet. Chromite says, is there a way to have the settings be sorted in a proper order, or is it always random? Well, let's go ahead and open up this file and see what Chromite is talking about. Now, we've mentioned this before, is when a table is serialized, written out as a string in Lua, there's no real order here. And that is inherent in how Lua does its table data structures. I think there's ways that you can get some sort of an order. I think what we saw before that if all of the keys are numbers, it might write out as some sort of order. I'd have to look into that. But in general, you should assume this is going to be random and can change each time. But it's okay. If you are a developer and you're trying to see the differences between the two, let's say we have both this file here and another file for a character. Something you can do if you're in a reasonably modern program is you can just go ahead and select that and say, go ahead and sort those lines, select that, go ahead and sort those lines. And at least they are now in a consistent order. And you can look and say, okay, height, left, locked, opacity, top, width. It's not a perfect solution, but if you had a larger file and you were using a file comparison tool, you could go ahead and write these out. Now that you've reordered them, you can save them, load them up in a file comparison tool, and see what differences there are there. The only gotcha with this is when you do the reorder, note that the very last item does not have a comma after it. Comma's optional there, so do add a comma here first, and then go ahead and do the reorder, just in case that final line is no longer the last line, because Lua will definitely have a problem if one of these does not have a comma after it. But we can go ahead and save this, it's not a problem. Load the plugin, unload the plugin, we can see the orders got completely randomized, and now width isn't the last thing anymore. So, yeah, Chromite says it's frustrating when debugging or trying to edit plugin data. Absolutely. So this is sort of a workaround that I use. Is a lot of more modern text editors will have some sort of way to sort the lines just automatically, even if it's a nonsensical thing like this. If you really wanted them to be in a specific way, you could have the keys be a little bit less, you could include that metadata in there. So for instance, I tend to think of the position as being a little bit as first, and then the width, and then the height, and then the opacity, and then the lock state. So this is sort of my canonical ordering of the data. And so if you really wanted to, like, you could do something like this, where an automatic sorting would go ahead and always restore it to this order. But this is fragile. This is prone to cause you problems, both if you forget this, or now you have to do your accesses, or you might do something like this so you can still use the alternative notation in Lua to access them. But what happens now if I want to go ahead and add something in the middle between width and height? You can't, right? You're locked into this. So I don't recommend this. Even the most trivial of save files gets more complicated over time. So yeah, just a thing you can do is there are Lua libraries for things like .NET where you can go ahead and load in the data. So you can have another program that pulls in both files and just sort of goes through and does a key value by key value comparison of the two. That's beyond the scope of this stream, but that is a thing you can do. Or you can just do the very basic sort, and they're not in any sort of useful order, but they're at least in the same order. So sort lines and then compare. So yeah, I wish there was something better. I don't think Lua 5.1 has a way to really deal with this, because we are not serializing the data. We give a table to LOTRO, and LOTRO serializes it using built-in Lua mechanics. And so I think short of manually serializing it into a string and then handing the string to LOTRO and then deserializing that back into a LOTRO table, and I would not recommend that at all. That would be a way to do it, and it's just not worth it. It's not a good idea. Okay, so that is not a good answer, but hopefully it kind of addresses your question, Chromite. Thank you for bringing that up. Okay, so we were, and feel free to type more, I'll continue in place if there were any other thoughts you had. We have a call to the save settings as default function when you click this button, and now we have a file, but we're not doing anything with it, so that's the next step. Okay, so we have a function called load settings. This is where all the settings stuff happens, and this is where we want to make our edit. First, let's go ahead and review. What does this function do? Well, the first thing we do is we try to load the settings file for this character. And if something's there, then we deal with it. Otherwise, we just use the default. It's good. Excuse me. So what we can do is between these two things, we can say, if this was not good, maybe there's a global file that we can use instead. So how do we check that? Well, this is either going to be nil or it will be a Lua table. And that's why this check works. And so we can do a very similar check here. So if this is not a table, or you could even say it is equal to nil, either one in this case. But really, if it wasn't a valid table, then let's go ahead and try the next one. So we know that we have other ones. We have the default settings data scope and the default settings file name. And so if this was not good data, maybe this is good data. So we go ahead and load that using the same patch data load function that we've already talked about. But that's pretty much it, because we already have a check that says if we're dealing with now with something that is valid, then use it. Otherwise, fall back on the settings that we already had. We're already there. So this is the character stuff. If the character stuff is bad, now it is either the account stuff or bad. If it's the account stuff or the character stuff, we're going to do something with it. Otherwise, defaults. Awesome. That's actually surprisingly easy to slip into the code as it already is. But does it work? Let's find out. So we've unloaded, we've reloaded. Let's take a look. Now, how are we going to test this? Well, first of all, let's go ahead and make it really obvious that this thing is different. So I'm going to go ahead and put it in the center of the screen and change its opacity to 100%. And we're going to go ahead and lock it in place and use that as the default. And unload. Now all the files are written out. We should have two here. Documents, Lord of the Rings, plugin data. We have an all servers default settings, and we have the character specific. We can simulate logging into a character that's never logged in before by either deleting this file or we could also just rename it to anything else because the plugin can't load it unless it's this exact file name. In this case, we're just going to go ahead and delete it. We'll delete both of those, actually. Now, this character is going to act like it has never logged in before. So, if we go ahead and load, well, that wasn't what I was expecting. Excellent. That is delightful. So, let's figure out what's going on. Whoops, that's the wrong folder. Okay, so we can see that it has loaded into what is more or less the default for the plugin. So that is still working. Now, we can rerun our test by deleting that file, just in case, and reload. Okay, we're still not seeing it load from the default file here. How does that look? Well, this file looks okay. Little Redhead likes how I'm so casual about, I'm just going to delete this file. So a secret, well, not really a secret, before I stream, I move all of my real plugin data out of the way. I just move it into a special folder that says this is the real stuff. And so when I'm streaming, I can delete anything under plugin data because it's not my real game data. It's just for the stream. When I'm done with the stream, there's an item on my checklist that says put that back so you can play the game and all your plugins will work. So yeah, I'm totally casual about deleting things in my plugin data and my plugins folder because those aren't my live plugin data and plugins folder. Those are just for the stream. My real ones are elsewhere. Exactly. I don't have to worry about it. Okay, so let's go back into the code and see what's going on, because something's not quite right here. I'm going to go ahead and I'll close that. Okay, so excellent. I did a copy paste and I wasn't thinking about it. I was too busy talking and not busy enough coding. What are we doing here? We are saying I want to declare a variable, a local variable called loaded settings. What does local mean? In Lua, it means this variable exists in the current scope and then vanishes as soon as the current scope is gone. Now, a scope can be a function, it can be a file, but it can also be an if statement. And so I am pretty sure what's happening is we're loading into this variable. We hit end, so that variable goes poof, and then this is not a valid table. Hello, someone whose name begins with ARG. Welcome to chat. So we're going to go ahead and fix that bug, delete that local statement here, and now we're going to reuse the existing variable to load this data in, and maybe that'll behave a little bit better. So let's go ahead and unload that plugin, go ahead and delete that save file there, because what we really want to see happen, exactly, there we go. We set up that default for all characters to be really obnoxiously here in the center, so we knew it was working. And the character logged in. There was no character-specific file, so we went to the account, the general account file instead. Awesome. So that is how you can go ahead and have a default for everyone, but then a specific character can come in and unlock this window, change it around. Maybe this character just doesn't do a lot of questing, so we'll have a little bit and we'll relock the window. But every other character is going to get that same black window in that very specific spot default. Ark says, love the game, have done for a while now. Me too. I really like the setting of LOTRO. I really enjoy the theme of it, and I've played games like World of Warcraft in the past, and I appreciate in LOTRO there is a general sense of the common good, right? Like Sauron and Saruman to a lesser extent are big enough bads. We don't need to be fighting amongst ourselves. And so I do appreciate the general setting and aesthetic. Oh, I just saw that those toolbars came back on. Let me fix that while I'm at it. So, we're going to go ahead and turn those off for the stream. I do have a lot of buttons there, but they're kind of busy looking. Cool. Neat. All right, just having a little tech support in the background. Okay. A voice in my ear is mentioning that Plugin Basics is on top of my window here. Now, fortunately, that's just the file menu and the title of the window. But in case you wanted to see those, I'll just drag that down a little bit for right now. Awesome. So what did we just do? We have a character-specific file that we try to load. If it's not there, we go ahead and load the count, a general default file. And then if that's not there, we always have the hard-coded defaults to fall back on. And so we'll look and see what that, make sure that still works. So we'll go ahead and delete all of those save files. Excellent. And come back in and load, and we can see we're back to the very default of just over there on the right and a little opaque that the plugin comes with. Very cool. So I'm going to go ahead and switch back to that scene. And what do we have here? We had a to-do item to save the current setup as a default for characters that are new to the plugin. And that's exactly what we just did. So now you can log in, position it once for one of your characters, hit that button, and now every character that logs in, it'll be in the spot that's good for you and your UI layout. Perfect. So we can cross that off our to-do list, come back into the README, and then, I don't know, describing things is hard, but Players can use their current setting to be the default for other characters that don't have their own settings. Sure. Good enough. Now, we've already released this, so someone's already logged in and to a dozen different characters. What do we do about that? Oh, that's a little bit hard because, as we've talked about, a plugin doesn't have access to the plugin data files of a different character. And so there's more complicated things we could do. We could say that we could develop all sorts of different ways to do it. But an easy way is if someone is comfortable deleting files on their own computer, they could come in and do what we just did. Delete any Opaque Quest Tracker file for any of those characters, and that would let the default take over. But we'll sort of cross that bridge when it comes to it. If anyone's using this, and if they've already have a dozen different configurations that are just slightly different, and they're looking for a unified solution, we can just help them one-on-one. But because this is really new, we only published it last week, there's not a lot of people, I suspect, who have been using it. Actually, I say that, and yet, LOTRO interface, I don't know. Let's go see how many downloads. So on the LOTRO interface page, there is a search. So we can search for Opaque, Opaque Quest Tracker. Oh, and on the search, we can see it's been downloaded 171 times, which in the grand scheme of things is not a lot. Some of these plugins have been downloaded tens of thousands of times, but since it was only went out last week and it's a really not well publicized plugin, that's pretty cool. Neat. Well, maybe some of you have downloaded it. If so, I hope it is helpful. All right. So we have done some changes. And if you are a source control type person, now's the time to go ahead and take a snapshot so that we can come back to here really easily. So we crossed an item off our to-do list. We added something onto our README file to make it really obvious what's changed. And finally, we can just do a quick little overview of what's changed. We can see we added those things. That looks good. We are checking for that file. That looks good. We have the helper function, excellent. We changed the size of the options window, and we added a button. Great. All right. All right. Added make default button. Options button. Cool. Let's start with that. Now, we did miss. Chromite in chat says, it takes a while for people to check for new plugins too. Not everyone checks them every day or use LOTRO plugin compendium every day. That's an excellent point. We did post about it on the LOTRO forums, but it's summer. Some people are on vacation, some people aren't checking, and even the most obsessive about us get distracted from time to time. Also, I did request it being added to LOTRO compendium, but Lunar Water is presumably on vacation or otherwise distracted. It hasn't been added in yet. So now it's only available to install by manually downloading it and installing it. So we may see more people getting it when they can just search for it in the LOTRO compendium. Oh, thank you, Little Redhead, for pasting that link into chat. I appreciate it. I completely forgot to do that. Okay, so I was just saying we forgot to do something. What was it that we forgot to do? We forgot to localize this text. Now remember, localization is the process of making it so a French speaker, a German speaker, or Russian speaker can come in and add in a translation easily without having to change a bunch of code, right? Does what? Doesn't work? Oh, thank you. I was mishearing. Excellent. My tech support was reminding me that I need to look and see which windows are covering which windows. I get so lazy when I'm just streaming my desktop because then what I see is what you see. Okay, so this string here, the use current settings as default. If someone wants to translate that to French, they have no choice but to go ahead and replace this text. Instead, what we introduced last time, maybe the time before that, is localization. So we have a table up here where we have a function that can look up alternate translations if they're available, and if not, fall back on the English. So for here, again, naming things is a little bit hard, but make default seems to be something that we're using. We're in the options section, and we're going to make a table here. This table is going to go ahead and have an English entry, of use current settings as default. I don't have a French or German entry yet, but that's okay. The get string function that we made last time looks up the current language, if it's English, French, German, or the unofficial Russian. And if it doesn't find it, it will just go ahead and default to the English. So it's okay not to have all of your translations at the same time. But we do have the English text here, so we can come on down, and instead of hard coding this here, we can say get string, and then lang dot options dot, and what do we say? Make default. So let's give that a try. We can unload, we can reload, come back on in here. Everything looks the same. How do we know it worked? Well, easiest way is to try to break it. If we come back in here, and instead of that, we have the English one be make go. Oops. Come back in, unload, reload. Awesome. We can see the text did change to make go, so we can see that this is correctly looking up the value in the table, and that means all of our translations are in one nice place. You don't have to go digging through the code to localize it to your language. That being said, we'll use the slightly more wordy use current settings as default. Awesome. Unload, reload, double check. Cool, it's in place. So that's something that can be easy to forget, and that's okay. Every once in a while, you just want to go through and make sure whatever text you're using is being pulled from your localization table and not just hard-coded in your code here. Now, did we do anything else? Oh, well, we can see the opacity label didn't get localized properly. Let's go ahead and fix that right now. What's going on with opacity up here? Does it look the same in English? Opacity, yes it does. Awesome. Let's go ahead and substitute that in. Instead of opacity, we'll go ahead and get the string. And it's using a string.format call. That's going to take a string with placeholders and then put in the specific thing at that time. So there's going to be a number there. Awesome. Well, real question, anything else? Nope. Neat. There are no other double quotes in the file down here, so that tells me I don't have any other unlocalized strings. Very cool. Now we reload it, make sure I didn't do a typo. We still have opacity. Great. So now we can go ahead and take a snapshot here of these changes. So that's the new string. That's using the opacity string, and that is the make default button string. Great. Additional localization. Sometimes my commit, my snapshot comments. Oh, my apologies. This is what we were looking at. Just the make default here, the label for the opacity, and the make default button. And my commit message of additional localization isn't very verbose. Sometimes I'm a little bit better about it, other times not. When it's something just like this, just a little bit of localization, you don't have to write a whole story about it. It's just localization. It's good. Okay. Well. So long, fork. Okay, the next thing, and this wasn't actually an idea that I had until someone in chat I think it was a few weeks ago, said, hey, it'd be cool if you, I'm paraphrasing, hey, it'd be cool if you could change the background color. I was like, you're right, that would be amazing. So, how do we do that? Well, there's many ways one could accomplish this. From the very basic, we could do a couple of sliders like this opacity, one for red, one for green, one for blue, and you could just slide them back and forth, adjusting the red, green, and blue values that go into making the color of the background. LOTRO uses that for all of its colors. So each one of those is a value between 0 and 1. And under the covers, 0 is of course 0, and 1 translates to a value of 255 if you're used to using hex numbers and 16-bit colors, I think. 16 million colors, anyway, for if you're used to using that. So 0 to 255, but scaled down into decimal numbers, 0 to 1. So a color of 111 is full values RGB, it's white. Colors of 000, no red, no green, no blue, that's black, and everything in between. So you could just do that. You could have a couple of sliders, but it would be neat if we could mimic how the in-game UI lets you pick from a range of colors without having to manipulate sliders. You just click the thing and that's your color. Well, how do we do that? Well, we could try to roll our own, but fortunately we don't need to. If we go to LOTRO interface and search for color picker, we're going to get a couple things back. We're going to get neat. Just checking what other things we get. We're going to get two things of interest for us today. The color picker class and another color picker by Thurlor. The first one by Galahad. So let's see. Can I make this window bigger? I sure can. Excellent. So the color picker is a class that primarily comes with this center stripe here and a little reticule over which shows you the color that you're currently hovering. And comes with sample code that shows you how to easily hook it up to a little preview square and a little label that shows you the exact hex value if you're used to looking at colors that way. Now, this is a simple class. It doesn't provide you full control over the colors, which is why I wanted to pull up Thurlor's another color picker. This is going to look very similar to some more advanced color selections. And the reason he brought it up is he wanted to be able to select colors that did not have 100% saturation, which wasn't an option for him here. So he went ahead and created this. If you're used to manipulation programs like the GNU image manipulation program or GIMP or Photoshop, or any of the more complicated programs, they might have similar things to this, where you have some preset colors, where you have more control over hue and saturation. And of course, an editor where you can plug in your own number. And I haven't tried this one, but I'm guessing Thurlor is pretty thorough. So I'm guessing if you type in your own hex value here, it would update the UI and snap that circle to where it should go. So I love this. I think it's a little overkill for our purpose here, but I want to find an excuse to use it because it looks great. It's exactly what I would try to do if I was trying to do one of these myself, because I would just be trying to mimic some of the existing tools out there also. So props to Thurlor. This looks amazing. So well done with that. That being said, today we're going to go with the what looks like easier to integrate color picker by Galahad, which is on LOTRO interface. You can search for color picker, or I'll go ahead and remember to put it into chat. There we go. So this is up on LOTRO interface. You can incorporate it into your own plugins. Okay. So what do we do? Well, the first thing is we're going to go ahead and download this thing. Now, a caveat is that the file as uploaded is in RAR format, not in zip format. RAR is an archive format that I don't think is natively supported by Windows. It is commonly you use a program called WinRAR, which is freely available. Let's see, WinRAR. Apparently it's win-rar.com. You can download the program. They do like it if you pay them for it, but if you're just downloading it to open up a single file, it is free for that purpose. So we can come on in here, and when I double click it, we get an Archive Explorer window. We can see it's an evaluation copy, good enough for my purposes. So, like most other archive programs, we can go ahead and click, drag it out, and we get a folder called Galahad Plugins. Great. Bye-bye, WinRAR. So, in here, we're going to get a .plugin file and a Lua file, a main file. This is the demo program that it comes with, and a folder called resources. And this is a much bigger window than I was expecting. This is a pre-made graphic, and this is sort of the secret to the color picker's success is they're not drawing all those pixels live. They have an image, they show the image, you click on the image, and based on where you're clicking, it knows what color should be there, and therefore what color you should have just clicked on. It's not determining the actual color of the pixel you clicked on live. It's using this as a cheat. So that's pretty cool. So this is a .plugin and a folder. So let's go ahead and copy that into our Documents folder, Lord of the Rings Online, and plugins. My mistake. I should have made a Galahad. So, oops. In the downloads, I should have made a Galahad plugins folder. I was in a hurry. So, Galahad plugins and picker and color picker can both go in there. Perfect. So, like with any other plugin, LOTRO does not automatically update. We need to click this green arrow to see the picker in here. We'll go ahead and start from scratch, unload everything. Let's load this picker sample and see what we have to play with. Awesome. Just like in the screenshot, we can see a window that has a color area and this cool little reticule that changes to the color that should be under your mouse cursor. Makes it bigger. It looks amazing. Oh, thank you, little redhead. Thank you, Moobot. So this is what the UI, basic UI looks like. The demo program also has a what did you just click on and what is the value tied into it. So if I click on this purpley looking color here, we with the left mouse button, we see that the box updates and we get that value. If I come up here to the far upper left, we can see it's almost black. And if we come in here to green right there, we can see lots of green, a little bit of blue. So this is fun to just play with and click on. It looks very pretty, but it's even better if we can integrate it into our program. So let's take a look at what that would look like. Now, the LOTRO interface page for this has instructions. We're going to run through them basically. But if you are trying to do this yourself, play around with the instructions that are right here as well. One of the things to watch out for that they call out in the known issues section is that the plugin, the library, the color picker can deal with you asking it to stretch the image narrower or wider. So if you don't want to use the full 450 pixels, like they are not here, this is just under 300 pixels wide. The normal one would be much wider than that. It can stretch it horizontally just fine, but at the time that they wrote this plugin, it did not account for stretching vertically. That may still be true. And so it's possible to do that, but you have to manually resize the image yourself or rescale the image yourself, save that, and then you can do that. So the height is fine. For us, the width is the concern because we want it to not take up the entire screen. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at that. So we've already downloaded the files. We have these files in a separate plugins file, folder, but what we really want to do is incorporate them in our own. So what do we need from that? We need two things. We need the colorpicker.lua and we need the resources folder. Well, we can do both of those together. Let me repurpose this window here. So in Cube plugins, in the Opaque Quest Tracker, I was playing around with this a little bit earlier. The resources folder doesn't need to be there because we're about to create it. So we copy color picker over, and we copy resources over, and we're ready to go. Okay. Nope, not that one. In the Opaque Quest Tracker Lua file, we now need to import the new color picker. Now, the first part of the path is the same. We're in the Cube plugins folder, we're in the Opaque Quest Tracker folder, and we're importing something called color picker. The second thing we need to do, and this is referenced in the help documentation, is we need to tell the color picker where to find the file. So you can do that in two ways. You can either have this in your code before you start using the color picker, or you can go into the color picker itself and change it there. The very first thing is this line. You can go ahead and just change it there. I like to do it in my code because it feels a little bit cleaner that way. So it's going to be a slash separated path instead of a period separated path. Oops. But other than that, it's going to look exactly the same. So we're in the Cube plugins, we're in Opaque Quest Tracker, we're in resources, and it's called picker.jpg. Neat. Now, as you might see, whenever you're doing an import like this or referencing an image, there isn't anything that stops you from referencing something in someone else's plugins folder. But that does mean you now depend on that being there or your plugin doesn't behave correctly. Now, there are ways to mark dependencies with the LOTRO compendium and to call them out on LOTRO interface, but that's just something to be aware of. If you're depending on someone else's plugin, it's good to be a little bit cleverer about it. For instance, the deed tracker plugin, if it sees that the waypoint plugin is present, will offer some extra functionality. But if the waypoint plugin isn't present, it doesn't try to do the thing. Okay, so we have got the color picker Lua file and the resource folder to our plugin directory, and we have imported the color picker file in our script, and we've set the value for picker JPEG dir, so it's pointing to the location. We're ready to go. There's sample code here. There's also sample code in the color picker main.lua. Here's where they create the window and create those the preview color and the label and hook things up. So I appreciate Galahad talking about us being able to copy this into our plugin if it makes it easier. I did play around a little bit with incorporating this into the options window, and there were some irregularities about that. So the easiest thing is just to pop open a window when it's time to pick a color. So I think that's what we're going to do today. All right. So one of the first things that we want to think about is there's not a lot of point in being able to change the color of the Opaque Quest Tracker if we're not going to go ahead and save that in our settings so that we can get it each time we log in. So, I need to fix that. So, in our default settings structure, which is kind of the template for if there isn't already a settings file, we want to go ahead and add in some entries for the color of the background. Now, there's no specific place we have to do this, but I feel like it goes hand in hand with opacity. So the easiest thing is when we are doing the colors here, let's go ahead and look at that. When you set the background color of a control in a LOTRO, you are creating a color out of an optional opacity. It could be just 100%, or you can have optionally control it, and then 3 values for red, green, and blue. We can see the same thing down here when we set the background color of the options to be that light gray. We are just doing a light red, a little green, a little blue. So those are the settings that we care about. So red, green, and blue. Awesome. So we've got some RGB in our settings for the opaque win. If we thought that we might eventually have more complicated UI, we could do things like say this is background red, background green, background blue. But for right now, for this plugin, I think it's safe to say that this is the only color that we're going to have for the near future. Okay. So let's just do a quick little unload and reload and make sure everything is working okay. Oh, you know, I forgot to double check that there was already a file in place, because it's nice to know that you're not going to cause a problem for people who already have the original version of the plugin. So plugin data, come on in to Tide and come on in. Excellent. Okay. So there's a file here. We can see it doesn't have red, green, or blue. So we are good to simulate someone coming into this not fresh, but they already have some files in place. Excellent. Okay, so the other thing where these settings are going to come into play is when we load settings. Remember from last time, there's a conversion function that we run floating point numbers through, or decimal values through, to make sure that the radix point, the comma or the period that separates the whole number from the fractional number, to make sure that is correct for the current client, regardless of what the last client was doing. This is important. We need to run this through each floating point number, and the red, green, and blue values are no exception. They're going to be a value between 0 and 1, and we need to make sure that they do the same thing. So red, green, blue, that's all we're doing here. So we're going to go ahead and just cheat a little bit. Go ahead and do a multi-select there, and a multi-select here. Excellent. So that's what we want to do. We want to go ahead and say the current value of red is the existing string formatted as a number based off of the whether it should have a comma in it or whether it should have a period in it. Excellent. So let's give that a try and see what's going on. Oh, that's fun. We have an error message. Let's check that out. We are looking at Opaque Quest Tracker, okay, line 79. And we're in the Euro normalize function. So what's going on? It's saying there's a bad argument number 1 to G sub right here. Expected a string and it got a nil value. Okay, so what happened is that value wasn't in the save file. And so when we said translate this, the function said, well, there's nothing to translate. Well, that's easy to fix. We can say if the thing that was passed in is nil, it doesn't exist, then go ahead and just return 0, because that seems like a reasonable default. If we include that in both of our Euro normalizes functions, excellent. So now we can load. What happens when we unload? What happens to that save file? Well, we can see that red, green, and blue get included automatically. Well, that's very handy. They're included because, excuse me, as part of the settings structure, they are just automatically written out when we say write out the settings structure. And they're in there because on load, during the load data, we forced them to be there. That was just what we were doing right there. So this process right here says that it's going to exist whether or not it already was. And as we just saw, it wasn't there. And we said, okay, default to 0. That's a fine default. So now they must be there. That's a convenient way to kind of upgrade our version 1 file to version 1.0.1 for free, essentially, because 0 happens to be black in this case, and that's what we were getting. So that's a great default. Okay. So now we have some red, green, and blue values. We're not using them yet, but we have them, and they're getting loaded and saved. So where would we use them? Well, we currently have a helper function that sets the background of the window. Let me go ahead and pull that back up here. So this window, currently we've only been playing with the opacity. So when we come in here to the options and we move that up and down, we're playing with the opacity, but so far the color has been fixed at black, 0. But this is where we can go ahead and change that. For instance, if we had said a slightly dark gray instead, then regardless of the opacity, that's the color that would be being used in the background. So we can substitute in these new setting values instead. The other thing is, what's going on with this opacity value? Do we need that? It's going to get clumsy if we start passing in 4 values all the time. Let's see who's using this. What's going on with this change window opacity? All right, when we create the main window, we pass in settings opaque.win opacity. Let's remember that. So new opacity might be that. Where else are we using this? Oh, when the scroll bar itself changes, we go ahead and call it with something called scaled opacity. Okay. But we've just assigned scaled opacity to settings.opaque.win, so we could have also called it with that. It would have just been more typing at the time. But that means that in the 2 places that we call it, it is either going to be settings.opaque.win opacity or settings.win opacity. That's cool. That means we probably don't need to pass that. So if we say local opacity equals that, and use that here, and each place where we were calling that, now we're not passing anything. We don't need to anymore. Well, that was a fair number of changes. Does it still work? Awesome, everything's still working fine. So we're not just talking about opacity now. Now we want to change colors. We should probably change the name of this function. It's going to be doing different things. So if we, instead of calling it change window opacity, if we call it update window back color, that might be a little bit closer because we're going to set that back color based on the opacity, and now the red, green, and blue values that we have in our setting. And that's how we're going to respond live to that. So local red equals, we'll go ahead and do some copy pasting here to save us some typing. Red, local green equals that dot green, and local blue equals that dot blue. Okay. So instead of hard coding these values, we can react to the values that are in the settings file. Now we don't have a way to change those yet, although we could do that by hand. That sounds like a fun experiment. But let's check this. Is it working? Well, unload, reload. Okay, we're back to black. What happens if we go and change that? So we can see green. Let's go ahead and set that to 1. I like green. And red, we'll set that to a little red. And not much blue. We'll just mostly green, a little red. So if we load this up, oh yeah, that's what I'm talking about. You definitely know you have some quests now. Yeah, see? So what did we just do? We said mostly green, a little red. We got mostly green, a little red. Awesome. I'm gonna undo that though. That's pretty harsh. We'll set that to 0.5 green instead. Oh, but that's gonna get overwritten as soon as we unload the plugin, of course. So we'll have to re-change it. Okay, that's a little gentler. That's nicer in the eyes. Cool, so we have a function that instead of just updating the opacity, now updates the opacity and the colors. Now we can circle back around to integrating in this color selector. So let's close that down. Let's come back in here. So we had a function to create the main window. Let's make another function to create this color selector. It'll be a little easier for it to be in its own function. So what do we do? Wait, we're creating a color picker window. All right. And then we can just put that right there. Cool. Okay. So the sample code comes with a couple of things. They looks like they've got a font and a color that they're going to be, let's pull that up. They've got a font and a color that they're going to use for this label. They create a window. They make sure it's big enough to hold this, this control here, which is this color picker. They also have a preview box. Interesting that they use a window. I think I would use a control for that, just to represent it a little bit more closely. And then they have a label using that color, what do they call beige? Yeah, I could see that. That font. And we can see that they start off with white in both cases. That seems like a pretty good default. It doesn't match our default of black though, so we'd want to maybe update that or even default to whatever the saved value was. We can look into that. And then what else do they do? It looks like you can react to the left clicking like they do here. And what do? They just update the box color and that text. And they're showing the 3 different ways to get the current color out of this control. They've been really helpful. They'll pre-construct a turbine color for you, or you can get it in just textual hex form like this, 00629C, or you can get it out as the 3 separate values. That's all super duper awesome. What else do we have? We have a right click. Oh, neat. So if you right click, it'll spit out the results of this, and we can see those are integers between 0 and 255. And we can double check that by coming down here to the very bottom. Can we find a white? Looks like the very bottom right is supposed to be white. Oh, close enough. All right. Cool, yeah, we can see that FF turns into 255. Great. That's exactly what we are going to go for. Oh, you kind of like the break thing? Okay. Cool. So this sample code has everything we need. In fact, we don't need to get too much more wild than this. So let's keep that to the side here as kind of inspiration for what we want to accomplish. All right, so the color picker window, we know we need that. The color picker. And maybe we can just start with that. Let's make a window. So we want this window to be something that we can enable or make visible by the press of a button. So it can't be local to this function or it'll just disappear at the end of this function. So we don't use the local keyword, and instead we'll go ahead and just color picker window equals what's it going to equal? Now, remember in our documentation here, well, that's pretty bright, we have turbine.ui.lotro.window is this skinned window with the blue button at the top. So that's where we want to go to. Turbine.ui.lotro.window. And if we were looking over here, we can see that's exactly what they did. Cool. So what else do we need to do? We're not going to set it visible like they've done. They want it to be visible when the plugin loads. We only want ours to be visible if someone pushes a button in the options to make it visible. So we'll come back to that. Size, position, well, we'll hold off. We have a window. That's the important thing. I do, thank you. I was just being reminded that things are getting crowded on the screen, and that is true, but here. We'll slide the line numbers out from under my face. Okay, so the size thing is the important thing. We'll start with that. We'll get inspired by their size. And the position, it might be one of those things where we want to position it dynamically based on the position of the parent. I'm not sure, but that's probably a fine default for right now. Set position 100, 100. Awesome. They do set the text to be color picker. That seems like a fine default. We could do something like opaque color picker or background. You can be more complicated, but someone just pushed a button to make this come up, so I don't think we have to be too clever with the name. But we do want to go ahead and remember to come back and localize that. Just in case in a different language it makes sense to call it something else. In fact, we can do that right now. Let's hoist that up. So we have options, color, whoops. Color picker. Awesome. So we can go ahead and hoist that up right now. So we're going to get that string. Now it's in lang, it's in options, and we know it's color picker. Okay. So we don't even have to think about localizing it later. We just get that for free. We also want to go ahead and put this color picker in while we're thinking about it. We'll follow up with the other things, but for now, we need a color picker. And the way they create this is they use the .create function of the color picker type. So we're going to go ahead and just do that too. Now, they do the same things that we do with any other UI control. We need to parent this or it's not going to be visible. So color picker, set parent. And we're just going to use the color picker window. It's a top level control, so everything's good there. And then they're going to set a size. And they call out again here, you can scale the width, but at the time of writing, you couldn't scale the height. It had to be 70. Well, no reason to even risk that. We can go ahead and set width to be 280. We don't even need to set the height. And then color picker, set position within the parent. You can see they've got it over a little bit and down a lot because the coordinates start at 0, 0 up here outside the window. So we want to bring it back down inside the window. So I completely agree with that coordinates. Let's go ahead and do that. And let's see what that looks like. Well, how? We need a button to activate that, don't we? We do. Okay, so in the options window, we already have a button here. Let's make another button that says pick the color or something. In fact, while we're thinking about text on the screen, that's a perfect time to come in here. Let's call it change color, maybe. And let's go make a button in the options control. So we're gonna add a button to open the color picker to choose the background color. Neat. So this is going to be a button. It's changed the color, so I'm going to call it change color button. Super easy. Now this is again a LOTRO branded plain button, and we're going to do the same things that we do with the button right above, in fact. So we can see all of that we're trying to do. So change color button. We're going to set the parent to be options. Change color button. We're going to go ahead and set the text. Now we already have localized this, so get string, and we know that's in lang, it's in options, and we know it's change color. So get that for free. We know we want to set the position below the other button. Everything has been indented by 10 pixels, so that's a good consistent thing to do. And we want it to be below the other button. The other button is a default height of around 20 pixels, so let's put it about 30 pixels below it. Now finally, the width, I'm not sure how wide we want to make it yet, so let's just stop there. We can go ahead and unload, we can reload, and come back into the options. Great, we have a button. It's not big enough, but we knew that was probably going to be the case. Let's go ahead and change color button set width, and let's see. What was the width of the other one? The other one's 250. That sounds way too big. But let's pop back in here. Yeah, that seems a little big. Now it's nice and consistent with the one above it, but let's maybe back that off a little bit. Okay, so we change it to 150. Awesome. In fact, I'm going to switch back so that this window doesn't keep hiding behind LOTRO when I click on it. There we go. Okay, so we have a width of a button, only 150. It says change color. We need it to do something though, so we need to have a click handler. Now, the documentation, once again, for a button, the button click is a callback. It takes sender and args. So we can do that same thing here. And we can see that right above in the code. I copy paste from existing code a lot instead of going all the way back to the documentation. So we go ahead and say there's going to be a callback function here. And what do we do here? That's a good question. What does this do? Oh, it calls set visible, of course. So we had the color picker window. So if we just say color picker window set visible to true, maybe that's all we need. I don't know. Let's find out. Let's come in here, unload, load options. Great. So if we click change color, oh, that's delightful. Excellent. Okay, so we can see we got a window, and we got a color picker that is the default 450 pixels wide. Now the problem is it's too big for the window that we made, and also the mouse stops working when you go outside the window. But it looks really cool. So Chromite suggests slapping Sarah Ocher, and I think that she doesn't get a lot of, I think she gets a lot of hate, but it's funny, I'm used to seeing her out, I don't go through the human prologue very often, and so when I encounter her in Fornost, when I encounter her in, what's the area in Erdlun? Down here, do have stuff on the screen. Thank you. Rath Tarag, is that the name of the area in Erdlun where in the prologue she's up here in Crookdell, and like she's zoom, she's gone. Like you don't even pay attention long enough. You're busy looking at quest text or something, and she's just gone. So I'm used to Sarah Oakart being like this speedy person who's like, okay, I'm gonna check the next door. I'm gonna check the next door, and you're like, I am in the middle of combat here. Maybe you could hold off on that. And so I see lots of memes about Sarah Oakart being slow, and I agree. She's a little slow sometimes, but it's like, well, she's kind of slow in Garth Argwin, I guess, but I'm here fighting these crawlers that have dropped down, and she's up there getting killed by skeletons. So I don't know what's going on with that. And then I played through the human tutorial, and I was like, oh, okay, that I get it now. But like one place out of the 6 places we encounter her, but I feel like a lot of people, their first time they encounter her is through the human prologue, and so it just sticks, right? Sarah Oakart's slow. Or maybe in the last 12 years they've gone back and bumped her up in various places, and I just don't have the original experience of her. So, sorry, a little bit of a sidetrack there. Oh, hey, there is a Ricket in chat who is saying, hello there, thanks for existing and contributing. Well, you're very welcome. I'm very glad to exist and contribute. I figured I wanted to spend some time working on Lua plugins in LOTRO, and I might as well put it out there in the world, and maybe some other people were interested in that too. And it seems like a few people are, so I'm very glad you're all here. Okay, so before we got off on my Sarah Oakart tangent, not that I think she's great, especially not with the spoiler, but I just don't think she's as slow as people say. Anyway, so we were noticing that although I had set the color picker, I had not correctly sized the color picker inside the window. So what did I do wrong? Well, I think I got too clever. They are using the set size function, and it's quite possible that that's what we have to do. So instead of only setting the width, and let's go ahead and collapse this back down. So instead of only setting the width of the color picker, let's go ahead and set the size. We'll go ahead and use that default of 70. We know we can't change it anyway, and see what happens here. Change color. Ah, there we go. The color picker is successfully scaled back down inside the window, which is good because now we can hover over it. And I just, props to, oh, who was it? Let's see. That was Galahad with the assistance of, I want to say Garen. Galahad and Garen. I do want to, if you're out there, this is just a really slick and beautiful interface. I really love the magnifying pop-out effect of this box on top. And I know there's other programs that you're probably emulating when you do that, but it's implemented really nicely here in LOTRO. Like it feels very natural and intuitive what you've done here. So props to that. I really love it. Now, what we haven't done is we don't have anything that responds to clicking. But I think we can go ahead and get that done too. All right, let's pull open our editor. So if we wanted to cover up all these elements on the screen, we're doing a really good job. All right, let me pull those out. Oh, hello, Epic Cougar. Welcome to chat. Yes, so we have both the color picker plugin window up here and our own imitation of it here. Now, I actually really like what they're doing here in the color picker plugin, where you click on it and you get kind of a confirmation of this is what we're going with. So I think we should emulate that and maybe add some sort of confirmation button like save or yes or do it, update, something. So once you're happy with the color that you've selected in game, you can then go ahead and confirm it. You don't click and it just close on you. You have to, you get a chance to sort of say yes or no. So let's go ahead and first imitate these, and then go ahead and add in that button that says save or update or something. I don't know. Naming things is hard. So the first thing we want to do is say, what did they do? Well, they had a window as this box. Maybe we'll do something similar. In fact, let's go ahead and copy this in as an example of what they've done. Since I'm running out of space on my screen, we'll do one window here. So selected color preview. They call it the current color. Yes, the color picker has a concept of the current color, but this is what was selected. Dericket in chat says, I play a Runekeeper, and as such, I have the desire to keep track of the tiers of some debuffs of my target, and while healing on my whole fellowship. Do you know of a plugin that can help me on that? With that? So, when I think about healing, I think about the plugin Mini Raid. Now, there are a couple different plugins for combat type things. Let me pull open a window here. I know I'm getting distracted, but I don't mind at all. So, LOTRO interface. If we come in here and we do a search for Mini Raid, this is in the category rating and instances. So we're going to pop that open into a new tab, actually. So this is the Mini Raid plugin. And one of the things as a minstrel, I use this to streamline what the UI looks like when I'm in a 12 or more person raid. Even in 6 person, it's nice. It's very, very compact. And so what we can see here, this is the standard view I would see in a 12-person raid, and you have the option, of course, to disable your game-specific views of the different party fellowships in the raid, and just use this. And on here we can see a little class symbol. The green bar is the morale, so we can see on the second row someone's taking a little bit of damage. There's a configurable point at which below that bar turns red to say, hey, you should go heal this person. I think it defaults to about 85%, but that is configurable. And underneath that is the power or rage or whatever that associated bar is. And so if you're in a raid where you got a lot of power draining diseases, you'll be able to see, oh, the other healer has no power. I should do something about that, or at least step up my healing. You can see I think there's a couple of, is that do not falls in there, and I have inconsistent results, but it is supposed to show you debuffs that can be cleansed by you. I don't always see them pop up here. I don't know if I have a configuration problem or if it's or if there's just some glitches sometimes. So I do keep my fellowship displays up because those are pretty good about showing debuffable things, or removable debuffs, I should say. So that's a screenshot. Oops. Yes. You can see in here, here's one of the configuration screens. It's ridiculous how much you can do with this. I have just scratched the surface. So I encourage you to look at some of those offerings. There's a whole category for rating and instances. I've only scratched the surface there as well. Mini Raid is one of them, but I think there's a couple other combat-oriented things. Chromite says there's a little bug that makes it hard to detect status effects on players in your group. So that may be what's going on. Yeah, definitely check that out. It's not the only one. It's not the only raid UI alternative out there to the in-game raid one, but it's what I was looking for when I was looking to heal a larger group. Just everyone's health in one place. You can click it to select the person if they're in range, just like you would expect. I think you can't queue something up, so you can't like hit a heal skill and then click the person, because by default you'll just heal yourself. But you can click their little box there, so you don't have to know. Now, a different Lua limitation is that plugins don't know what order people are in their fellowships. So when people have been coming in and leaving and coming in and leaving your fellowships, Mini Raid was written at a time where it knew people were in your fellowship, but not the order. So you can shift click and drag people around in that. Let me put that back up. And there's an interface. You can just shift click and drag someone to reorder them on this display. And so once a raid is fully formed, I'll just do that. I'll just go and reorder people so that at least in my group, we're the top 6 and we're in order, so that I can just do F1 to F6 really easily to select those first 3. It matters a little less in other groups. I think there are keyboard shortcuts where you could select the third person in group 3, but that's beyond what I'm doing. At that point, I'm just clicking their box. Okay, cool. Well, yeah, good luck with that. With looking into that. We'll go ahead and hide that. Okay, cool. So back to mimicking what this already has. We see this here. In fact, other than the basic local color preview, we're going to go ahead and instead of using a window, I'm just going to use a control. I think it better matches what we're doing here. But the rest of this is well worth imitating here. So we're going to go ahead and do color preview and make sure that we click the right parent. But the size of it is great. The position is probably good for our purposes. The background color, it's defaulting to white. It might be better for us to default to our saved value, but we'll come back to that. And then I'm setting it to be visible. It's going to be visible automatically. I'm not going to worry about that. And we're good. Now the other thing they did was when you left click on this control, it updates both of these. So that's overriding the left click event handler in the color picker dot left click. They're declaring that function. Neat. Now we're not going to make use of everything in here yet. In fact, we'll just come back in here and comment those out a second. But what we can do is we can go ahead and update the background of that. So we're going to set that background color. And we can see it's going to be color picker, get turbine color. That sounds really easy. Okay. I do not have an apartment. I must unload them all. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and unload. We're going to reload and come back into the change color. While we're in here, if we click, we can see the box is updating. Now we don't have the text yet, but that's a really cool start. I like having the text there for those people who care about hex values of colors. It can be neat to see. We could just skip it and say, save. We don't need to show the hex value, but why not? It's pretty common to see that kind of thing. So in the sample code, we have this section. Let's take a look and see how much that we want to be inspired by. Okay, selected color hex value. Now we can go ahead and call it, color label is fine. And that's just going to be a normal Turbine UI label. There's no LOTRO skinning for labels. They're just text on the screen. And then what are we doing? We're setting the parent, position, size, all sorts of fun stuff. Oh, sure. Let's go ahead and lift that and kind of tailor it to what we want. Now, we do need to update that name, of course. And then we do need to set the parent correctly. So we're going to get it in a position. We're going to get a size. Epic Uger says, when will this be on LOTRO plugin compendium? Well, I put in the request during the last stream, but it's a manual process where you go to the LOTRO plugin compendium and say, hey, can you add this please? And someone has to look at it and manually add it, make sure it works. I think that person is Lunar Water, and I don't know if they're on vacation or if they're just having other things on their mind. So it hasn't happened yet, but it wouldn't surprise me if in the next couple of weeks, especially as summer comes to a close, it will be in the LOTRO compendium. Someone, Dorica asks, how good is the documentation of the LOTRO API? So that's a very subjective question, but one of the things I have been showing is the downloadable API documentation. Now, let's see, LOTRO API documentation. If I were to go ahead and search for LOTRO API documentation, we get the first thing. This is the reference on the LOTRO interface wiki. The other one is, let's see, there is a LOTRO interface entry. This might be it. I'd have to double check to see if this is the latest. I've got a link in one of the previous streams. But either way, you can download it locally. And that's what I keep referring back to when I keep referring to the Lua documentation. This is was last updated, it looks like, for 25. Yeah, there we go. Oh, that's funny. All right, so update 25 Lua documentation. Neat. Let me put that in the chat. Update 25 Lua documentation. So, this will give you a zip file that you download, and inside are a bunch of hyperlinked HTML files that give you the basic API for working Lua in LOTRO. It doesn't tell you how to do Lua itself, but Lua is a pretty easy language to pick up. But it does tell you things like how to load and save in the PluginData folder, how to create things. Now, it's not necessarily very intuitive, and that's part of the point of the plugin along series of videos, is to kind of take the information that you can find in the API documentation in the Lua reference guide and kind of say, what does it take to take that and put it into a plugin to make something? So you could definitely check out the videos, especially on YouTube. There are timestamps for various portions of the discussions. So if you're just looking for how do I make a button appear on the screen, you could go to, it was probably episode 1, and click on button in the time codes and jump straight to that part of the video. So how good or bad is it? You know, I could definitely see expanding these to have more sample code. I could see expanding them to include a little bit more information. But that's one of the reasons why I keep both of these links. The LOTRO interface wiki has some of the information that I like to see. So for instance, if I were to come into the turbine, let's see, the enumeration. So if I'm looking at the data scope enumerations, they'll actually include the numerical values in those underlying enumerations. Now, you shouldn't use them, but they can be neat to look at to just get a sense of what's going on. And if you are spitting a value out into the console, into the chat log, because you're getting something and you're not sure what it is, it can be really useful to go back and look and say, oh, it's character, right. But in all other respects, I prefer the downloadable documentation for how it's laid out. But if you come into Datascope, it doesn't give those values. And that's fine. You normally don't need them, but it can be nice to have that secondary resource. So as far as a bare bones, what can you do? I find the documentation fine. It doesn't have 100% of everything. There are a few things that the plugin community knows about, like how to get the options screen to pop up that you don't necessarily find in here. Let's see. Yeah, there's a plugin variable when the plugin is first loading that it feels like it should be mentioned in this area, and it's not. And you can do things with that, like say, here is the options screen or stuff like that. And so it's not 100%, but the plugin community has done a pretty good job of kind of filling in those gaps and providing things like this where we kind of teach each other what we know. Little Redhead is filling in some details in chat. Thank you very much for that. And as a follow-on to that, I and most of the streamers on the official LOTRO stream channel are not employees of SSG and don't have any real insider information. we pay attention and we listen to the official streams and we official sources of information and we theorize, but that's all we have. We are not employees and we don't know more than the average person except by these little bits that we glean from here and there. We have heard that SSG would like to tweak the little plugin interface to make improvements here and there, but they would like to do a lot of things, and the community would love them to do a lot of things. There are so many things that the community as a whole wants to see that they could be busy for years and never run out of work. So if Lua gets any love from them anytime soon, I will be delighted, but in the meantime, we can make some really cool things with what we have. All right. So that being said, we have a colored label. Now we are looking at a few hard-coded values here for the font and the color. I'm going to go ahead and rename those a little bit. So we want, let's see, color, label, font, color, label, color, really. I think those will be a little bit easier to keep track of. So let's take a look. What does this look like? I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that and that. What does this look like, especially now that we can update that value with the selected value also? Oh, sorry. I was updating the wrong code there. So we're going to set that text to the return value of the color picker, just as a starting point. That sounds great, but we do want to remember to update that name. Okay, let's come back in and take a look at that. Come into the options, click change color. Awesome. We have replicated what the picker plugin has as well. We have the ability to click on here and update things. But now we can go a step further. We can go ahead and integrate it into the Opaque Quest Tracker so we can update that background color. Oh, Durkit says, thanks for taking your time for answers. You're very welcome. Like I always say at the beginning of these streams, I do have sort of an idea of topics I want to cover during a stream, but I love getting sidetracked and talking about plugins in general or LOTRO because it's really fun. Oh, hey, the fog has cleared. Hang on. So one of the things I really like about this position on the prancing pony is off in the distance you can see the dead spire in the Barrow Downs, which is a landmark that you spend a lot of time running around if you spend time in the Barrow Downs. And it just, I was up here and was like, wait a second, is that? And yes, we're on a deadline to the dead spire right there. So that's pretty cool. Okay, we're gonna cover it back up though. All right, so we've got that replication. In fact, I'm not even sure which one of these is mine and which one is the picker. So I'm gonna unload those and reload. Awesome. So now that we have this, let's maybe add a button where we can save this. Okay, so we have the label, and maybe we want to go ahead and add a button underneath of that. Now we don't have any space here, but we can make this taller, right? What do we think? Let's go ahead and just make it 20 taller and see if that is big enough. Now, what do buttons look like? Well, local. What is this? Save, update? Sure. Save button. This is a turbine UI LOTRO themed button. Whoops. I am just clicking the wrong keys. Now, we've already seen a couple buttons, so we could kind of try to copy them. For instance, here's a button. And this is a way I tend to save a little bit of time when I am creating UI elements. Now, if you're doing a lot of the same type of element, it can help to abstract that out to its own function. But for now, we'll just go ahead and do this. In fact, we might even want a label here. button which updates the settings and recolors the window. Cool. All right, so we have, we're setting the parent correctly. Oh, well, that's not right, but it could be close. We need a, save color. Sure. All right. Save. Nice and easy. So we're going to go ahead and call that lang.options.saveColor. Oh, position. We want it to be in the middle of the window. And let's assume 100 pixels will be wide enough. So we want 50 on one side, 50 on the other, and we know the window is 300. So left, 100 over from the left, we'll center it. And how far down? Well, we want it to be underneath the other stuff. Let's try 150 and see what happens. All right, so we unload, we reload, we change color. Oh, hey, that actually looks pretty good. Now, we don't respond to anything, or rather, we do the wrong thing. We make the window visible again. But we can go ahead and do something in this function. What do we do? Well, there's ways to get the red, green, and blue colors directly from this thing. And that's exactly what we want, because we want to update our saved values of red, green, and blue. I think I'll spell them out, though. So red, green, and blue equals, and then we did call this something different. We called it color picker. And the function get RGB color. Great, let's do that. And then what are we going to do? We want to update our settings. So we know our settings in the opaque window. We know we have them for red, green, and blue. And when we saw this before, we saw that these numbers that are returned are between 0 and 255. But we know that our settings are between 0 and 1. So we do want to go ahead and scale this down. We want to divide by 255 to be working in the correct system. Now, it's optional. You can do whichever one you want, but whenever you pass these color values to a turbine color or a set background function call, we are dealing with the decimal version. So saving it off as decimal seems like a fine thing to do. So settings, we're going to go ahead and do that for each one of them. And now what do we do? What do we do with that? Well, there was a function, update window back color, that we call whenever the opacity or now the color has changed. Okay, well, what happens if we do that? Unload, reload, options, change color. Okay, so we get a color picker. And now if we have, say, this color blue and we click save, awesome, the background of the the Opaque Quest Tracker plugin has changed. Click over here on this, let's call it a salmon-y color. Where'd it go? Yeah. Click save, bam. You're not going to miss that section of the window. A little tan, maybe blend in with the trees a little bit here. That's a lot of fun just to play with. All right, I will stop playing with the colors. Okay. Chromite says, nice observation on the dead spire. I never spent the time to check that. Yeah, I have my settings only set to high, but I happen to be high up in Bree, and the dead spire is just like the thing that you would be able to see from Breetown if you were looking in the right direction. I actually wasn't even sure, so I pulled up the waypoint and fed in the coordinates, and it was dead ahead, so at that point I knew. Okay, so we have a color picker. If we click the save button, it does that. Quick question, have we done enough where if I unload and reload, oh my goodness, it's the same color. Let's go ahead and change it to a blue, save that, unload, reload, neat, change color. How about a maroony thing? Unload, reload. Awesome. So we have added in a change color widget that lets us select visually a color without having to know the hex value, but we do see it. Click the save button, it updates, and when we unload and reload the plugin, it persists. That sounds amazing. Now, there are a couple of niceties that we could even touch on while we're here. Notice that each time we bring this up, the window defaults to white, even though the window background over here isn't white. So maybe we could do something about that. So in this function here, where we're creating the window, we could, let's see, the color picker itself doesn't seem to care or doesn't have any way to show, but the selected color preview. So before this, get the current color values. So we know that the values are stored in settings.opaquewin.red, and of course we've got green and blue in the corresponding values. But we know these are 0 to 1. And that's not going to work for the label here. The label in LOTRO is expecting a hexadecimal number, not a value between 0 and 1, but a value between 0 and 255, but in base 16. Now we can do that. We can deal with that. First of all, we want to convert this from 0 to 1 to 0 to 255. That's pretty easy. So red times 255. Now that is going to be a decimal number still. For instance, if it was 0.8, oh, well, let's just come up with a number. So 0.725 times 255 would be, neat, 184.875. Now that's not great for our purposes, so we would like to round that number. I don't know that Lua has a rounding feature, but I know it has a floor feature, and so we can fake it out. So if we did a math.floor on this value, it would be right most of the time, but if we went ahead and added 0.5, then if we were at 254.9, floor would go the wrong way. But we go ahead and add that 0.5. We're going to get 255.4. That's going to floor down to 255. Perfect. And same thing, floor will get us a value of 0, so we know we can hit 0 or 255. So that's going to be a good approximation of a rounding function. Now, we can do the same thing for green and blue. And local blue num. It's not a great name. I mean, it's all numbers, kind of, but I think we'll understand what we're talking about. Okay, so we have rescaled those numbers from 0 to 1 to 0 to 255. And so now we have them in both ways. If we were going to do this a lot across our program in various areas, these would be great things to abstract out into a function. But for right now, it's fine just to have it right here in line. So what do we do with that? We have two places. We have the default color here, and instead of passing 1, we can go ahead and pass red, green, and blue. In fact, we can go ahead and double check that that looks correct. So, excellent. The box itself is the same color, but the label hasn't been updated yet. That's not too bad. So, we can go ahead and look at the text here. Now, Lua does have some string formatting abilities, so that whole turning a base 10 number into base 16, we don't have to actually do that ourselves. We can instead use the string format function. So we can say string.format, and in here, each one of these 2 byte numbers, we can go ahead and say we want it to be a hexadecimal number, and we're going to use red num, green num, and blue num. Now, there's a problem with this. If you're familiar with these formatting flags, you're going to already know what it is. But let's take a look and see what it looks like. If we come on in here, we can see that there's only 5 digits here. Now, what's happened? Well, it looks like the first number here was all zeros, which is 0, 0, and then 2E and B3. And by default, this formatting flag just does not use leading zeros, and we want it to. We want it to look nice like any other visual program might. And there's a thing you can do. You can say we're going to make this too wide, and the string.format has saved the day. We don't have to worry about converting into base 16. This doesn't for us. So if we click around, we can just see BC, 2D, and let's see, oh, I like that. And B8631D, if we go ahead and unload, reload, come back in, we can still see it's still B8631D. So we're properly pre-populating this with the actual background color of the Opaque Quest Tracker area. Neat. Okay, I'm going to check chat and get a little drink. Now, there's another thing I'm looking at here. The very top of this area and the selection area itself are kind of hard. It's kind of hard to see where the box ends, where the black is, where the preview color is. And I think if we were to put a little light gray background behind that, that would make this a little bit better of an experience. And fortunately for us, that's actually pretty easy to do, because we can just slap a control with a background. In fact, that's pretty much what the Opaque Quest Tracker is. So let's go ahead and do that real fast. We're going to make a background, or we're going to call a variable, call it background, and it's going to be a turbine.ui.control, just a basic box that we're going to draw in. We do need to go ahead and set that parent so that it is part of the drawing tree color picker window. And we need to go ahead and set the background. Now, in this case, we're not going to use an opacity. We're just going to use RGB values. And in fact, we can just do the same light, or I should say dark gray that we're using in the options window itself. It's a pretty neutral color. And then the final things we need are the position and the size. Set size, yeah, and the background set position. We'll work on that. So we want it to be just a little bit wider than the color picker here, and we can see that that's 280. So if we have a couple extra pixels on each size, then we know that's going to be 284. And if we know it's going to be as tall as the picker plus the thing underneath it, well, we'll come back to that. I just want to see this in action. And then positioning-wise, same thing. It wants to start a couple pixels to the left of the color picker, and maybe a couple pixels above it. So 38 instead of 40. Let's come back in. Oh, that is much easier to see. So if I go ahead and save that blackness, we can see there's just that little border around the edge here. It didn't go quite as tall as I would like it to, though. So let's come on back in and actually do the math. So we know that this preview color It starts at 120 and it goes to 143. So we want to extend to 145. Okay, so we know it's 145 minus the starting position here. And in fact, you don't have to collapse that into a single number. You can leave the math in here. So, neat. So now we have a little dark background, which helps us find the upper extent of this color picker area, and lets us see the preview. Now, yes, this will not work if your preview itself is gray, but that seems like a fine compromise. A really complicated system might try to bounce the background color away from the selected color, but I think we'll call this a good enough solution. If you are picking a dark gray, at least it's not the default. The default's going to be black up here. Can I click it? Yes, the default's going to be black. It's going to be obvious that this is here, and if people are clicking around, it's going to be really obvious what's happening here. So I think that's a fine place to leave that. Now, the color picker could go away when you click save, but personally, I find the color here and the color how it shows up in the opaque background is, they're close, but the opacity can change things. So that brilliant blue, it doesn't come out quite as brilliant when it's a little bit more opaque. So I think it makes sense to leave this open so you can just be clicking around and keep clicking save. And at some point you can be like, oh yeah, I like how that blends with the trees. You close it, it's fine. If you forget to close it, you just play LOTRO with the color picker open. And that's fine too. Oh, Iron Wolf. Well, welcome. Sorry you weren't able to be here. Yes, as Little Redhead said, it will be present both here on the Twitch channel, and you'll find an annotated version up on YouTube, and there'll be an accompanying blog post as well, and you'll find a link to that from the YouTube video as well. So yeah, catch you later. I'm afraid I've gone a little bit over my normal ending time. Hopefully some people are still here, but if not, we're practically done here. Okay, let me check my notes. Well, as we are coming up to the end of this, because I feel like we've made a lot of progress here, let me go ahead and pull up our to-do file. So we had a to-do of making a color picker for the background color. We have done that, so let's update that. In our README, added background color picker. And we can go ahead and look at source control and make sure no mistakes crept in. So our to-do was a color picker. Awesome. README says that. Now, in source control, if you have a new file, there's nothing to compare it to. There's just a little mark here to show it's brand new, and the image. And finally, our changes. We go ahead and import it. That looks great. We have some new strings. Those look great. We have these to handle missing values. We have red, green, blue, updating a window background color. Oops. What was that last thing? Oh, good. Yes. We have a new function to create the color picker window. Awesome. We have changed the name of change window opacity to update window back color. That seems like a much more reasonable description of what's going on. We have a button in the options window to open up that picker. And we create the color picker window. These are all good changes. Love it. Let's go ahead and take a snapshot. Cool. Okay. So, I was hoping we might have enough time this week to go ahead and show how one would push that out. I'm going to do a whirlwind tour of that because I don't think we have time to do the full thing right here. But at LOTROinterface.com, when one is logged in, you can see that. Then if you have uploaded a plugin, like the Opaque Quest Tracker, then at the bottom of that, there is an edit button. This edit button allows you to change the, well, can you change the name? Maybe. You can definitely change the version. So if we were uploading a new file, that would be version 1.0.1. You can replace the existing file with a new file. We would package up all of the files into a zip file and upload that here. Nope, not yet. We would go ahead and update our description with the new stuff in there. So there's a little revision history section. We would go ahead and put something in there to call out what's changed. We could delete old archived versions. I don't think that's necessary. I like having a few old versions around in case I break something in a recent release. And then you can upload new pictures. I think these pictures, the first one's fine, but the second one doesn't have those two new options that we have. So I would want to take a snapshot of that picture and go ahead and upload a new one there. And finally, do you want other people to be able to patch your interface? Of course! Community involvement in plugins is great. And finally, you hit the upload button. Update button. So that is a whirlwind tour of what it's like to update a plugin that you have already published on LOTRO interface. At that point, you don't have to do another request for the LOTRO compendium. That's a one and done. But it's worth going out to the LOTRO forums and saying, look at this cool addition I did to something that you may already know about, in case people are only looking for changes there and not on LOTRO interface or LOTRO compendium. So that's cool. I will probably do that with these changes that we've done because I would love for people to be able to use them. And I am off next week. Next week I am moving houses. And so my computer will be in pieces. So next week I'm off, but the week after that, I think it might be time to move on to a different plugin topic. I think there's a lot of potential things one could do with an Opaque Quest Tracker, but it really is, at its core, a dark thing to put under your quest tracking area. And we've accomplished that. We've changed colors, made the saved values a little bit friendlier. I think we're good with that, and we can move on. I have some ideas for some fun things to play around with, some other small plugins that we can kind of touch on a few new things. Oh, hey, we have some Raiders rating just as I'm doing my wrap up. But welcome, 19 Raiders. I appreciate you being here. If you are not familiar, Plugging Along is a LOTRO stream where we talk about LOTRO plugins, how to create plugins, how to publish plugins, and talking about plugins if people have questions there too. Unfortunately, I was just wrapping up because I'm actually 47 minutes over my normal stop time. I don't know why I call it that. I keep going over, but I theoretically try to keep it to 2 hours. You may hear my voice is getting a little rough right now. So thank you all for joining me for this. As I said, I'm off next week. If you have thoughts or ideas on things you might want to see in a plugin along, you can always email me at LOTRODtracker@gmail.com, or you can message me here on Twitch, or leave a comment on one of these videos on the Life Beyond the Shire YouTube page. You have options to get a hold of me. But worst case scenario. Oh, excellent. Yes, the thing that we've been working on is an Opaque Quest Tracker. And it's in a little bit of a funky state right now. But the idea is that a friend of mine was having trouble reading the text in their Quest Tracker. And unlike the chat interface, which lets you set the opacity, there isn't a built-in way to do that, to set the opacity behind the Quest Tracker. And so began the Opaque Quest Tracker plugin, where we go ahead and have a box. We can change the position of it. We can change the size of it. We can change the opacity. And just today, we added in the ability to change that color in case we want to go ahead and have it be violently red or green or something. Why not? Make it really stand out. So we showed how to integrate this third-party library into your code and then use it in order to grab that value and then set the background. So that's what today's been all about, is kind of these quality of life improvements of now that we have a box, maybe we can change the color, maybe we don't have to reposition it for every character, that kind of thing. So if that kind of thing appeals to you, do maybe watch the VOD or check it out on YouTube. And if you like the idea of learning more about plugin development, come visit us again next time. Okay, well, we're done with that window. Let's see, do I have anything else that I wanted to cover? All right, well, if there's any last minute questions in chat, let's get those really fast before I wrap up, and I'll get a last drink of water. All right, I don't see any last minute questions coming into chat. I do want to thank all of you who have been active in chat, asking questions, pointing out mistakes when I make them, all sorts of fun interactions. I appreciate you being here, especially for the suggestions on things to do. The color changer was completely a watcher suggestion that I hadn't even thought of, and then it went on the list and we got to it today. Oh, Chromite. Oh, yes. Chromite asks, would you be up to fixing minor bugs in certain plugins and then list an example with Bootstrap? Yes, in general, I like the idea of that. I have a couple of tweaks I want to make to some other plugins, and I think just a general, let's look at these and submit patches to them would be a really fun way to do that. If you would message me either on Twitch or on that email address here, LOTRODtracker@gmail.com, just to remind me in case I forget between now and when I stumble to bed in the not too distant future, or if you have any other ideas as well, and then I'll add that to the pile of plugin fix-it day stream or something. Maybe it can be like the first Tuesday or something. Oh, thank you, Little Redhead, for plugging that in. Oh, Discord. Yes. There is a Discord. There is a Discord that I have for the deed tracker, and I keep forgetting to make a link that's not one of those 7-day expiration ones. So let me go ahead and do that again, and I'll create another 7-day expiration one, and I'll plug it into chat here. So anyone who's interested in learning more about the deed tracker plugin, or just generally talking, I've got a plugin development section going there as well. So let me go and, let's see, invite people. There we go. Oh, yes, you are in there. Yes, you can message me in Discord. Absolutely. My brain is elsewhere. But for anyone else who happens to still be watching, if you wanted to join me on the Discord that I use for plugin development, specifically the ones I'm maintaining, but you can chat with us about anything there. Just pop on in and say hi. Otherwise, yeah, Chromite, you've seen me on multiple Discord servers, I think. Just shoot me a message there. That'll be great. Awesome. Cool, cool, cool. Okay, well, I think that's all we're going to cover today. Thanks so much for joining me on this exploration of LOTRO plugins. I hope to see you all the week after next week, because I'm off next week. And until then, keep plugging along. All right, bye-bye now.